Recording. Hey
Can you
everyone.
hear me all right?
Hey everyone. Yep. So I'm back with another interview, this time with my friend Jim Rothblatt, who's had a really interesting life. He spent time in Vietnam, and we're going to talk about that today. Hey Jim.
Hi there.
All right, Jim. So tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, how did you come to be in Vietnam? I mean, why did you go?
Uh, well, Vietnam had just started up in 1965 as far as the American involvement. I was in college and not doing very well, and I'd been getting my 2S draft deferments, and I wound up on academic probation as a senior in college, and you know, was a fan of Kennedy's, and I'm sort of alert to what was going on in the world, and I was kind of my country, right or wrong. And so it was easier for me to drop out of college and join the Army than it was to face my parents and tell them I wasn't going to graduate again that year. It was like I, I turned in my college for the Army.
So you,
And I had a line that my friends didn't think was all that bright, but it was wars don't come along all that often, so you got to grab them while you have a chance.
oh my gosh, okay. So I mean, you went through, all kinds of basic training and such. But what are your recollections, your memories of your first impressions once you got to Vietnam?
Uh, well, I went over to Vietnam on a ship, and we were sort of prepped, and I'd watched the newsreels, about the war in Indochina and the French and all that kind of stuff. So I knew it was kind of a jungle kind of environment. And the training I went through prior to going to Vietnam was a lot of it was in swamps and all that kind of stuff. But it was the people, the smells, the poverty, uh, just being in a foreign country. That's the first I hadn't traveled, so that was all new to me. And it was pretty exciting, actually, and it was all paid vacation by the U.S. government. I didn't have to worry about what I was going to wear or the food I was going to eat or who I was going to be hanging out with. Or, I mean, if you saw the movie, what was it, Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
it was like everything was taken care of. It was,
But did you really feel, I mean, you say vacation, I know kiddingly, everything's
yes.
taken care of. I mean, you're going into a pretty hostile environment. I mean, how did that affect you? How old, you're about 20, 21?
I was 23 when I went over. I turned 24 while I was there. I actually, it was a stage of my life where I was actually pretty depressed. And based upon the training I'd gone through and everything that I was seeing and hearing and knowing, I really expected that I wasn't going to be coming home. I thought for my first 6 months over there, I was going to get killed and that I just was going to be witness to my own death. So I wasn't scared. Uh, it was like kind of an end of life adventure, which is kind of sick to say. And um, I never felt so alive thinking that I was going to die. And I never had such camaraderie with other folks as I did with the men that I was going over with. And I'd grown up on World War II movies and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like I was sort of a participant in history and reliving one of those movies I'd watched.
Well, you never felt so alive, meaning that you thought today could be my last day?
Yeah, every minute could be my last minute. It was a certain alertness that and I didn't want to let the people down. I wanted to be able to do my job. So it was, and that was true for pretty much all of us. I mean, we all depended, our lives depended on one another. And so, and, if there was ever a time when you didn't want to disappoint the people around you, that was it.
But you were a medic, right? So you weren't
That's correct, yes.
actually fighting anyone then. So I mean, why did you feel that you were going to die?
I was a medic with an infantry platoon. Do you know, if you'd seen our platoon, you couldn't have picked the medic out. I looked just like everyone else. I had no Red Cross. I had a weapon. I had it all. I was an infantryman until someone was hurt. Just like a radio man. He was a radio man. He was an infantryman until he needed to be on the radio. I mean, I was just the only medic in a platoon. And I was, and if I got hurt, there was no medic in the platoon. And so, I was at the same risk as everyone else.
Had you had medical training prior to this, or?
No. And the medical training we got was only a 10-week course in the Army. And 5 weeks was first aid and field medicine, and 5 weeks was in case I had been assigned to a hospital, making beds, giving enemas, and all that kind of stuff. So 5 weeks of it, I didn't need at all. So you can figure I had 5 weeks of training. In fact, when going over on a ship, just before we landed in Vietnam, our battalion surgeon rounded the medics up, because medics were part of headquarters company, and then medics were assigned out, attached to different rifle companies. I was attached to 2nd Platoon of Charlie Company, 4th Battalion, 12th Infantry. That was my assignment. So, but all the medics were rounded up on board the ship, and the battalion surgeon gave us about a 15-minute talk on how to do a tracheotomy if we needed to. Not with any visuals, just, feel right here, look around for a pin or something that you can put in and just to punch a hole through, So, I mean, that was our tracheotomy training. I mean, that's how intense all this was. I mean, I had more training on giving an enema than on that kind of stuff.
Did you ever have to do a tracheotomy?
No, but interestingly enough, the first man that was killed in our platoon, I wasn't with the platoon when he got killed, and I would have had to do a tracheotomy. If someone had done a tracheotomy, it probably would have saved his life. He got hit in the neck by a piece of shrapnel. So I got bumped by supplies on a supply chopper. That's why I wasn't there.
How many people were in your platoon?
Well, I don't know the exact numbers. There were approximately 40 when we went over, but with attrition and all that, for the most part, it was somewhere between 22 and 28, I would say. So kind of if you feel like a classroom in school, we were about that size, and people would get hurt and leave, and you'd never see them again, and then new people would come in. So it was always changing, but somewhere from the low 20s to the high 20s, probably.
So how did that affect your relationships, Jim? I mean, you had said, okay, I might die any day. I mean, you saw people that you depended on die.
Right.
Well, I mean, how did you emotionally, how did you deal with that?
Well, everyone's going through the same thing, and so it's hard to say. I mean, you develop really tight friendships, and the degree of honesty between people, armed and dangerous people, and you don't like everyone that you're with, but you're dependent on everyone that you're with. So it was, in a sense, it was like some of these, what do I want to say? It was an intense group experience, where you share your hurts. It was okay to cry in front of people. That was unusual for me. It was, people could say they were scared, and people could get angry and cursing. I mean, language was filled with motherfuck this and motherfuck that, and it could be a good thing or a bad thing. Same words, same language. It was an intensity that you just don't get anywhere and experienced it anywhere else. It's hard. beyond that, it's hard to explain. It was a brotherly love. I mean, you're never so close to men, the maybe you don't know, but your bodies are touching each other, up close. I mean, kind of lover stuff, but there's none of that in it. It's you. We're never so close to other humans. Maybe crowding onto a subway in New York at peak hour or something, but I mean, you like sardines sometimes on a truck or in a chopper or in a foxhole or during the night. I mean, the typical in the infantry, at least I can only speak to the time I was there. The war shifted in certain ways after I left, so, and was probably different in other units. But typically, like I was in close proximity to two radio telephone operators, RTOs. One carried a radio for the platoon leader, one carried a radio for the um, platoon sergeant. And I was the medic. So I was part of what's called the platoon CP command post. So I would pull, I was in, for the guys on the line, they had 3-man fire teams. So 3-3-3. And so it was typically on watch. One person would be awake when at night or whatever. And that varied. And then two people tried to get sleep, and you're sleeping under the same poncho line or right next to each other. Like like the one RTO that I was closest to was a guy by the name of Ron Legault. And I used to joke with him that I'll have to be married for 10 years before I sleep with my wife as much as I'm sleeping with you. And you're foul and dirty and stink and never take a shower. So there's no one in civilian life that you ever spend that much time with, at least in this country, that smells as bad as we did. And that didn't matter. You really couldn't smell anyone over yourself anyway.
Right. Right.
I mean,
Are
that's
you
an intimacy that's hard to find,
right?
anywhere else.
Right. Um, are you still friends with any of the guys that were in your platoon or that you met? Have you kept in contact with people? Do you have reunions?
Well, thanks to internet, I've been able to get in touch with a few. I'd say two of my closest friends are two guys that I never met that were in my same unit, and we got hooked up through a, a message board from guys from our same unit. I'm in touch with a couple of people that I served with uh, that I'm pretty close with and in contact with, but I didn't stay in contact with anyone until, thanks to the internet, came along. So yes, I'm in contact with a few.
You're in contact with a few. I mean, I've heard, some of your stories and some of your other interviews. Some really sad stuff, of course. But what are some of the stories that, you like to recount to people that really give them a flavor for what Vietnam was about for you personally?
Well, for so many years, and you saw or heard me in that you watched a couple of the incidents that I went through in certain amount of detail, but for so many years I had running in my head some of these what we now call traumatic events playing in my head like a bad scene out of a bad movie that the term for it is yeah, what is it where you just have your thoughts that you can't control, they just show up, intrusive thoughts,
Yeah.
that everything would be a trigger for something, and still is in a lot of ways. So and that went on for a good 17 years before it started to let up. And then one of the things that changed was I realized and I hadn't realized that I'd been impacted. I thought I came out clean, even though I'm crazy in a certain way. I didn't. And so I started writing some of the stuff down because I thought, well, I had children and I thought, well, maybe long after I'm gone, they'll find the stuff that I've written down, and it'll kind of explain some of the things about me that, you know, they wouldn't have understood. And that's kind of why I'm doing these kind of interviews when I get the chance. You know, this is the third one I've been able to do, and just kind of leaving it in case they should ever have an interest. Maybe they'll discover the stuff after I'm gone, and it'll have some meaning to them in their lives. Though my kids have been impacted, and my wife as well. In fact, my wife once described my involvement in rethinking and reliving and educating myself on the whole experience as the other woman.
What are some of those stories, Jim, then that you might share with us?
Well, the big one, and you've heard me tell this in one of the interviews, but I'll put it on this one. And it was the first death I experienced. It took place on February 5th, 1967. And our platoon had been bloodied. That day was a really rough day, and our company had 9 casualties, not in my platoon, one of the other platoons. So it was a pretty heavy day in terms of being hit hard by the company. We'd already had 1 death in my platoon. That was the guy I mentioned that got hit in the throat by the shrapnel. We've had 2 guys with amputations in our company, one in my platoon where he lost a foot, and one of the other platoons, a guy lost both his arms. So, you know, we'd had other assorted injuries. In fact, the one where the guy lost his arms, which was one of the other platoons, his ring turned into a piece of shrapnel and wounded another guy so badly in the femur that he was never able to return to the company. So that's the kind of stuff. I mean, to give you an idea, like body parts could be weapons, you know, I mean, or rings or a watch or anything. So anyway, this one day, February 5th, was a long, hard day. We'd been being shot at all day, but they'd been missing us. We'd been blowing stuff up. We were totally exhausted. We were not near where we needed to be for night. It was a whole different, in the war zone, it was a whole big difference between day and night. It's significant. Anyway, so we were trying to get back to our perimeter before darkness. And anyway, we were hustling back, trying to get back before it was dark. And I was at the rear of the platoon column, and we took some fire, and there was a lot of return fire. And I heard this voice in the middle of all this noise saying, "Help me, I'm hurt." And I looked back. We were up on a berm, and there was a ditch full of water down below us. And I could see a helmet bobbing in the water. So I jumped down into the ditch and reached under, and there's a guy. He'd been hurt, and he was struggling to keep his head above water. And as soon as I grabbed him, he went unconscious. Now that all by itself was, you know, that he could struggle. And then when I touched him, he kind of just let go. I mean, I didn't realize until recently that that's kind of a beautiful thing all by itself in a weird way, you know. As soon as he knew someone else was there, he could let go. Anyway, so I couldn't lift him up. He was too friggin' heavy with all his gear and all. And so we were alone except for a photographer that had joined us that day who was up on the berm behind a tree. And he was snapping my picture. He was standing up, peering around this tree, and I'm yelling at him to help me get this guy up. We're still getting fire, but I guess because it was dark, it couldn't see us good. So anyway, so I got really pissed off that this guy wouldn't help. We finally got the guy up on the berm, and I stripped his clothes off, and I wound up giving him mouth to mouth. So then he died, short version. And he died with my air in his lungs, which again, there's an intimacy to that. This is my first death that I've experienced out there. And of course, it didn't strike me at the time. This is all comes at me years later. And anyway, I made up and and I could see the photographer taking my photo all through this. And I'm thinking it's too dark for these to even come out at this point. So I made up my mind I was going to strangle the photographer to death to show him my disappointment in not helping me when we got back at the perimeter. Anyway, I got back to the perimeter. I searched him out. Yeah, let's go ahead.
This was serious. I mean, you really wanted to kill the guy because he didn't help you.
Oh, there was no doubt I was going to. I mean, he might have killed me in the process, but I was determined that I wanted to let him go. I wanted to wake him up, let him go to sleep, and then wake him up by strangling him so we could look each other in the eyes. And so I gave him a couple hours to settle in and went looking for him. Couldn't find him. Turns out he got on the chopper with the body. And so, and I didn't know the guy. He brand new to the platoon, so I never even had a chance to meet him. So anyway, I experienced deaths after that, and all the other deaths were people I knew, and this guy, I didn't really think of it as that big a deal compared to all the rest that I was going through, but in the course of my lifetime and some of the issues that I was having, particularly with my anger, I still have wrestling with an anger problem that can verge on rage. And it comes down in a therapy session, it came down to the fact that I couldn't strangle that guy. I couldn't fulfill it. And so, and I was asking him for help for others. And I've spent a career helping in service to others.
That's right.
So there are various, as you know, there are various gatekeepers to services that are publicly funded that people deserve service. So when I'm working with someone that I know by name and I look in their face and it's my job to get them to the next level of service, and I run into a gatekeeper that says no or delays it or won't do it or says something like, well, it's not my job, I wind up having adrenaline rushes and harboring thoughts that cause me significant problems in my professional life. In my personal life, that's a different story. Right. So given that incident with that photographer has over the years caused me problems with my kids, with my wife, and on the job. Though on the job, I'm able to handle it because I signed up for the work. And I know how to work professionally without stepping over the line where they're going to get rid of me, but I could certainly be intimidating, and it works for me strangely enough professionally, but it doesn't work for me personally, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. But Jim, was that anger, I mean, was that something as a result of Vietnam, or was it something in your growing up and it kind of culminated with this, this scene with this photographer? What do you think that was about?
I've always had anger issues, I can say, but I never had them where I had homicidal thoughts before. That took it to a different level. I mean, and then the course of being in war where your job is to kill people and you see people injured and killed and all that, you become sort of like just punching someone isn't enough anymore. It doesn't satisfy, what you've been desensitized to. It's and I've never gone over the edge. Some people even think I'm normal, and I appreciate that. If this is what normal feels like from the inside, then that I'm kind of worried about the rest of us. But no, I'm able to function, in society and all that kind of stuff. I'm not dangerous, though I have thoughts that trouble me from time to time.
So the photographer, I mean, were you angry because he just wouldn't help you, or because he was just a bystander watching someone die? I mean, would it have made a difference with this guy at all if he would have helped you? What was it?
Well, it's because he's the only person that was out there that would not have helped.
Mm.
And he was just doing his job. He would have had to step out of his role. And so I think that there are certain times that we as human beings owe one another, that there are just certain times when we need to step out of our roles, even if we're working, to do what's right. And it's not up to me to decide what's right or not. But damn, in that situation, the guy could have put the camera down for about 3 seconds and stepped up. And I think you saw one of the other interviews where I found out my next door neighbor was a combat photographer. And he said that combat photographers in World War II had similar discussions about similar things, and 90% of them wouldn't have stepped in either. But if you don't mind, and you know you're doing this interview, but I could take it and tell you another story that comes off of that.
Yeah, please.
There have been a number of times when I've had the opportunity to visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. So I was out, and so I've been in Washington, D.C. a few times for pleasure and a few times for business. So I was there on a business trip once and got some time off and decided to go down to the memorial and visit some of the names of the people that I knew who died over there. And it was freezing cold. It was rainy. I'm from California. I don't know about freezing cold rain all that much. So, but I'm out there freezing, hardly anyone around, and I'm just spending time out there. And along comes this group of kids. It's a classroom. It was on a field trip. And so they get up to me. I'm the only one around, and they ask me if I was a vet. Yes. Do you know anyone on the wall? Yes. And I was standing next to this guy's name. His name was McElvey, James McElvey. So I was standing next to his name, and I said, well, I can tell you a story about this guy, and I pointed out his name. So they were into it. So I told the same story I just told, basically. And they all thanked me, had asked if they could take their photo with me and all that stuff, and then they walk off. And so, I'm standing there, and about 20 minutes later, the instructor, the teacher, comes back alone about the class. And he says, I could have been that photographer. And he starts bawling his eyes out. I mean, so here I am, I'm standing here, and I got this guy, and he says that he used to be a photojournalist for the Orange County Register or something like that, some Southern California newspaper. And he said, and I probably wouldn't have helped either. So here I am, I'm standing by the wall. This teacher, bawling his eyes out, and I'm putting him back together, telling him it's all right. I mean, it's it's all complex. It's all woven. It's all cellular. It's just what it is. That's our president would say. It is what it is. And I don't know what to say anymore about that, but it was just an amazing experience, to be standing there talking to a guy, like doing penance for the photographer that I wanted to murder in a way.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah, how that kind of thing happens in life. Yeah, if you're open to it. Incredible. How long were you actually in Vietnam, Jim?
Well, it was we got credit for the 3 weeks crossing on the ship. So that was 21 days. It's a 1 year, a 1 year exactly tour of duty. So my tour started when we left on the ship out of Presidio up in Oakland. And I got home 3 days before would have been a year. So 3 days short of a year minus the 3 weeks in the crossing.
You're not, they give you.
What's that?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Well, for 3 months, my last 3 months, I was an ambulance driver. So I wasn't in the field and I wasn't in any particular danger. That was pretty kickback duty.
Okay. But you had time off, right? That's not, the 9 months then or whatever, 10 months actually out? Or is it?
Well, not much time off. We would generally be out for about a month, and then they just usually bring us back into the base camp to shower and get a break, and that was usually half. We come in, say in the morning on the day we came back in, we'd have that afternoon to get all cleaned up. We'd get the next day off, and then the following day we'd be back out. So I figured I had 8 showers in my first 8 months.
Once a month. Okay. Oh my God. I mean, what do you do though when you're out in the field? So you're just, I mean, you're sleeping out there, and I mean, weren't you like incredibly anxious? Aren't you know? I could see just going up and down and up and down, and
Well, it's work. It's you're exhausted. You never get a full night's. You never get sleep. You never if you to get more than 4 hours sleep at any one time is like incredible. So you're so exhausted. I mean, and if you stop somewhere, you can sleep for 5 minutes or something. So the exhaustion sort of tempers the stress in a way. And you kind of get used to the stress because it's just what it is. I could share another story with you that
yeah, please.
showed me what stress was like. So this happened just a few years ago. So I'm sleeping away in my bedroom here at Palm Springs, years after Vietnam. It's all gone, hardly even part of my thoughts. And outside our bedroom window, we had a window air conditioner, and next to the air conditioner, we had a tangerine tree. So I'm sleeping away, minding my own business. And so what happened? A tangerine fell out of the tree and landed on the air conditioner. Bang! And I woke up with a start thinking I was in Vietnam. And the stress that I felt was, it showed me what used to be normal. It was like a photograph. And so that was a tell for me, because you really can't remember what that was like. But and weirdly, when you were in the situation that was actual combat, adrenaline kicks in, and you're not even thinking, you're just reacting, you're falling back on your training, and time stops. And so you're only scared, not so much when stuff is happening, you're scared when nothing's happening, because you know what's going to happen. I mean, imagine if every time you go out driving and you've been in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 accidents, and there's another one going to happen. There's no way that it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean you don't drive, but it definitely changes the way you would feel. It's like, God, will I survive the next one? Will I get hurt? What will that look like? And you see what people look like when they get hurt. Man, you don't want to have that.
So when you say time stops, so I'm imagining, or I'm thinking about when I get really tired, and I'm just not at the top of my game, of course. But when time stops, adrenaline's flowing, so you are really focused on what your mission is. Then you're able to overcome the stress and the tiredness and such.
Yeah, you're just you're just in it. Like one guy that I'm in contact with quite a bit now. We found each other about 3 or 4 years ago, and we shared. We were there together on the longest firefight that we were ever in, which I've got the after action reports and all that. So it was about 6 hours. I knew it had to be more than 10 minutes of all the stuff that went on and remembering it. But it's hard, to this day, even knowing I see the reports and stuff, I can't stretch it out into 6 hours. So if you can compress 6 hours into 10 minutes of what it feels like, I mean, you have no sense of time. it's, you know, hard to explain. I mean, I like, and I don't know if this happens to other people, but I once had a riding my bicycle once. I'm going up Varner Road fast as I could go. Got it downhill, got the wind behind me. I'm big gears, I'm flying. And this dog walks out in front of me and stops. I couldn't even hit the brakes. I hit that dog on my bicycle, went up in the air, turned sideways. My feet are locked into the pedals. I'm watching the cars go by on the freeway. And it was like it was all in slow motion. And I'm having the thought, God, when I hit the ground, the dog's going to attack me. But it was like, that was, you know, time didn't mean anything. Of course, that was a time when it all slowed down, not speeded up, but that kind of stuff, you know.
Okay. What were the Vietnamese like? I mean, how did they embrace you? Did they, you know, spit on you? What was your
Well,
feeling?
we didn't have a lot of interaction with them, you know. We did work alongside some of the Vietnamese Rangers. We were supposed to be training them, so I got to know a few of the Army Rangers fairly well. And like I've shared with some people, I knew a lot of dumb shits and people I didn't like in Vietnam, and none of them were Vietnamese. You know, I had a great amount of respect for the Vietnamese on what I saw and what I respected them as an enemy. And another thing that we used to do, part of what we would do sometimes, we called them search and seals. That we would, and this we did it fairly often, but it wasn't a regular part of our routine. But we'd sneak around the village in the middle of the night, surround it, so no one could come in or out. And then in the morning, the Vietnamese army people and their intelligence people would come in and they'd search the village looking for deserters and Viet Cong. And we'd be sitting, and so we were the boogeymen in the middle of the night, you know, sneaking around, setting up. You know, sometimes a dog would bark, but we'd be outside these little villages and they'd have a pagoda and you could smell the incense coming out of the pagoda and hear the temple bells. And it was so peaceful and beautiful. And I'm thinking, God, all these people want to do is farm their ancestral fields and have the government, whoever that is, just leave them alone. You know, it's like for me, it was like war in the Garden of Eden. And, and God, it was,
So did you feel like an
it was
invader?
such ugly.
Sorry,
What's that?
did you feel like an invader then? I mean,
Oh yeah, we were an occupying force. There's no doubt in my mind now we were in the middle of another people's civil war. You know, taking sides, and you know, and we took the side of you know, the people that weren't very nice. I mean, the ones that most reflected our own side. You know, with graft and corruption. And you know, I mean, here's Ho Chi Minh, who was the man. He could walk among his people, you know, with people fawning over him. On, um, None of our leaders could do that today.
yeah, not at all.
You know, and we're the democracy, and we wouldn't let them have their vote to see if they wanted to reunify their country in 1956. What was that? And you know, Ho Chi Minh tried to base their constitution on the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights. You know, it's like we have as a people. I was a pawn in, you know, our international politics, as every soldier is. You know, and and one of the things why I want to do this and kind of tell my story, which is nothing really. What makes my story special is that it's not special. I worked with, I served with the low of the lows. I with the grubbed out, drafty, dirt infantryman with the minimal training of anyone in the service whose lives we were cannon fodder. And it's the universal story of the infantryman that I got to be a part of. And so my story is only one of 2.8 million. But again, my story feels, I tell my story, and I wish as many other vets would tell their stories no matter what they did. But I take pride in having been part of the cannon fodder group, the draftees, and the people that I met and got to know and love, and that kind of brotherhood, are as special and smart and as anyone you ever meet. But we were pawns, and that's what's cool about it. That's why the story needs. That's why I'm willing to tell the story. Don't do it. It's not my story. It's every man's story that lived in the dirt and the mud and the fear and all that, and eaten by bugs. And no animal lives worse than an infantryman, no matter what military they're in. They don't get in. They don't come in out of the rain. They don't come in out of the snow. If it's cold, they freeze. If it's hot, they sweat. It's you don't seek shelter. The shelter isn't part of your training. You can't. No, homeless people live better.
And when you went to Vietnam, Jim, though, I mean, did you have these same feelings that you were a pawn? Did you think politically at all, or did this kind of develop over the course of being in Vietnam?
Oh, well, I grew up on war movies, and my father had been in the service, and I was kind of a patriot. And I, I shook hands with John Kennedy when he was campaigning for president in 1960, and that handshake, it was like, in fact, today is the anniversary of his assassination, so which stands out to me. So in 1960, I was 17 years old. I walk out, I was standing on the sidewalk. He's coming by. I'm with this friend of mine. He says, "Let's go out and shake his hand." So we walked out to his car, put my hand out. He shakes my hand. He says something profound like "hi," And from that moment, I was willing to follow him anywhere. And then he gets elected president, and he gives his speech, about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So, and I'm a patriot. I've got all that. And I thought they were a higher pay grade than me. My country, right or wrong. I believe that Kennedy said that it was the thing to do, then I'm going to serve my country like my uncles did, like my father did, so, and it was like an adventure. It got me out of college where I wasn't doing well. And with my first haircut and my uniform, for the first time in my life, I had a real sense of belonging to something. And the other thing that I learned that I think is important that I haven't been able to tell in the 2 interviews I've done is those of us that was served in these kind of frontline units, we were just a cross section of America. Like, you didn't have to be anything special to be able to, as long as you were relatively physically okay and you were a little bit smarter than a chimpanzee, you could do the job. And people earned awards and got promoted and left the service and became important people. And, it wasn't a bunch of flunkies out there. It was a cross section of America. And, so sometimes I hear some of these guys that were elite troopers and specially trained and all that, like their stuff doesn't smell, but none of them ever said, "Hey, this job is too dangerous. I want to go be a frontline grunt in some straight leg infantry unit." None of them ever said that. They went the other direction. People went, "God, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to become a sniper," or "I'm going to get out of here. I want to work on a chopper." or whatever. It didn't. You didn't go downhill. You went uphill. We were at the point of the spear, is what they call it. The queen of the army. It's, and a cross section of America based upon the draft, which doesn't exist anymore.
So it was a very diverse army or military at that time then.
It was the first fully, except gender-wise, it was the first fully integrated U.S. military. With people of color in leadership roles, all the troops all integrated completely. It wasn't about any of that.
When you came back, so it was 1967 you came back or 68?
I came back in December of, well, late November of 67.
Okay. And
I
what,
probably got back just about the time. I probably got back just about the time now. I probably had Thanksgiving at home.
now, so like 53 years ago. And what, I mean, do you remember your feelings at that time when you came back? I mean, obviously a lot of anti-war protests and all that. What do you remember about that coming back?
Well, I still had a year to go in the Army.
Okay.
I was lost. I had a month off before I had to report back. So so I went to my parents' place. They were living in Palm Springs at the time. They were both working. So I'd spent a lot of time at home, and they had a color TV set. I'd never had a color TV set. There were things that happened while I was in the Army. It was like Rip Van Winkle. So like mini skirts came out while I was, in Vietnam. So I came back to young, beautiful women in mini skirts. I mean, I had, so that was, I was trying to catch up to the world, the color TV set. It used to drive my father crazy because I'd mess with the color. So people's faces would be green or orange. And, he hated that because, but I don't know why I did it. It's just, the other weird thing is I started hanging out in malls. I hate shopping malls, but I started going to shopping malls because they were the exact opposite of what I'd been through. It was like there was nothing further away from what I'd been doing than to be in a shopping mall. You can believe that. And one time, in fact, I would feel invisible. Like nobody knew what I'd been through. I was just another dickhead walking around.
Right.
And this feeling of invisibility was like overwhelming to me. So once I went and tested it out in a May company. So I'm in a May company department store, and they have the main aisles that cross, perpendicular. So I went and sat down on the floor at the intersection of two of these main aisles and just sat there to see if anybody would notice me. No one did. Here's this dumbass guy sitting in the intersection and security didn't come over. No one came over and asked if I was all right. People walked by me without even seeing me. It's like I am invisible. And so invisibility kind of describes it. And I tried to hook up with some of my friends that I'd had before I went in the Army. And they didn't even ask me a question about it. It's like I never left. It was like, I've been gone for 2 years. It's like, and of course their lives had just going on like they'd been. And so I have no contact with any of those people that I was best friends with before I went in. I mean, it was like one of my best friends, he said to me once, "You're no fun anymore." So that's how he saw me, which is completely true, I'm sure. That may have been the last time I saw him, but these were people that meant so much to me at one time, and they didn't care, didn't notice I was gone. It was like painful. that was my experience. That's, I'm sure, different for other people.
But so Vietnam, I mean, obviously had a huge impact on your life. I mean, do you have any regrets about, not finishing college at that time and going?
All the time. Yes, if I could do one thing over again, I'd be a better student. Uh, yeah, I don't have regrets about going into the military because I learned so much and I came through it okay. As one of my friends that I've been in contact with says, none of that's worth it, the 58,000 that were killed. But I got a lot out of it. But I never achieved the career goals I think that I was really cut out for because I messed up so badly in college. If I could go back and do it again, I'd cut back on the drinking as an undergraduate and cut back on the chasing sex and concentrate a little bit more on my studies. So that's the only real regret I've got on that. And maybe not disappoint my parents as much as I did.
Yeah. When you came back though, you started a career then? You went back to college? What did you do?
Well, I got an early out to go back to school because I had to finish my BA. I needed 6 units. I dropped out of school and joined the Army 6 units short of graduation.
Huh.
But because I was on an academic probation, I had to get 24 units of A's and B's to get my GPA up to a 2.0 so that I could get my degree. So, which I did. I did that in basically 6 months. I started college 5 years ahead of my sister, and we graduated at the same time.
Huh.
So just uh, so then I wound up with a series of different jobs and wound up moving to Palm Springs and was just uh, trying to find out what I wanted to do. I did go back because I did go back to school after I got my degree and I got a teaching credential. But I couldn't get hired as a teacher anywhere. So I just did all these different jobs, working as a gardener, school bus driver, uh, worked for the post office, different things. And then I realized I was going to lose the GI Bill. You got in the Army at that time, or the military, you got GI Bill, they'd pay you so much each month for every month you were in the service. So I had done most of my military time before I joined the service. So it was, and you had 10 years to use it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to school. So I didn't lose my GI Bill. So I decided I'd go to a state school in California because they cost the least amount of money. Then I decided what school I would pick. I picked Humboldt State because it was out in the redwoods, as far away from anywhere as I could find on a map, 60 miles south of the Oregon border. Then I sent away for their catalog to see what I thought I could stand the major in. And I picked psychology because I thought it would be easy and that anyone could be good at psychology. And packed up my stuff and went and got a master's degree in psychology and wound up becoming a school counselor.
And
Because
also, go ahead.
What's that? Go ahead. No, I'm interested in your question. I'm interested in your question.
Have you also worked with vets and kind of helped them, kind of get through their whatever issues they're dealing with?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because that's a big part of what happened with me. When I first moved to Palm Springs, which was in 1971, I just wanted to talk to another Vietnam vet. Didn't know any. Didn't know anyone here. So I called every VFW post and American Legion post in the Valley, asking if they could hook me up with another Vietnam vet. None of them knew a Vietnam vet, at least no one that answered the phone. And none of them said, "Oh, you're a vet, come on down." I remember the war is still going in 1971. These people so that was disappointing, made me angry. Of course, I already told you I got an anger problem and they're gatekeepers, right? So then in 1983, I hear that the VA is opening up, what do they call it? Storefront counseling centers to talk to Vietnam vets. It was actually started by Vietnam Veterans Against the War, but the VA picked it up. So I went down to the closest one was in Riverside. So I went down and asked if for some counseling. And as soon as they heard that I had a degree in psychology, it's like, hey, why don't you work with us? So instead of getting counseling, they asked me to kind of be a volunteer counselor and working with some groups there, which isn't exactly what I was looking for, but it was something. So for a year, I drove down there once a week and sat in on different groups that they had going. They were called rap groups at the time, which were pretty friggin' amazing. I mean, it was a real positive experience for me. It wasn't what I'd asked for, but I was getting to meet other Vietnam vets and God, remarkable stories, unreal. Remember, the war is still go. Well, the war has been over now, but these guys were so fresh and raw. And anyway, so then after a year of that, they asked me. And they offered me a job to be a counselor, but I was a school counselor at the time, and they didn't pay nearly as well as school counseling did, or have as good benefits as school counseling. So I said, well. And they said, well, what about halftime? Couldn't do halftime. Couldn't. So I go, well, what about 10 hours a week? They go, well, you can do 10 hours a week, but we can't pay you. So I said, okay. So I filled out a 7-page federal application for a job with the VA to get a job that didn't pay me anything. And then they said, we want you to see if there's a need for counseling services in the Coachella Valley where you live. Well, how am I? They said, we want you to start a chapter of Vietnam Veterans of America, which I wound up doing. So that was my first experience running a nonprofit. I became the president of Chapter 368 of Vietnam Veterans of America here in the Valley, which after I can't remember, by the second year was the second largest chapter of Vietnam Veterans of America in California. The only one larger was in San Diego. And we raised tons of money. It was because people at that time, if you were a veteran organization, they were throwing money at us. I had to tell some people to stop giving us money because the insanity at the time among vets was crazy. I mean, talk about transient vets walking around the country, drugs, alcohol, mental problems. And as soon as our treasury had money in it, they went nuts. They wanted to party off of it. So I wound up having to shut it all down. But through that, we were able to determine that there was a need for counseling for vets here in the Valley. And so I wound up getting hired by Coachella Valley Counseling Service that wrote a contract with the VA to provide counseling service here in the Valley. And part of the deal was they had to hire me as one of the therapists to do PTSD assessments and counseling. So I did that for 12 years. Now, of course, VA has a clinic here on Cook Street, but I was instrumental in, I like to think I was instrumental in bringing those services here to the Valley. It was nearly destroyed my relationship with my wife and my kids. That could be a whole interview all by itself. With the kind of, I saw more Vietnam vets die while I was with that than I did in Vietnam through self-destructive behaviors. I got stories upon stories about all that. VVA, Vietnam Veterans of America, became a dirty word in my house. I don't even say it today. All these years later, I quit doing that, and then in schools, because I worked in schools, and one of my friends who was a social studies teacher one day said, "Hey Jim, would you come to my history class and talk about your service in Vietnam?" I said, "Well, I'm not going to represent everybody that served in Vietnam, but I'll tell you what, I'll bring some guys in and do that." So for years, I wound up taking panels of Vietnam vets into local schools, talking to American studies classes, which was pretty amazing. I had female vets, I had all services represented. I even had some Vietnamese at some of them. So, and But I burned out all that in 96. I couldn't do any of it anymore, so I quit all that. Got too much. I got PTSD from doing all that. And that's why I'm real careful now about my connections to nonprofits and all. It's I got a little carried away. Watch it.
I hear you. Jim, were you involved then in the anti-war movement at all when you came back?
No, I was sympathetic to it, but I avoided any organizations at all. But I was sympathetic. And it turns out I've got a fair amount of friends that I met along the way that were part of that. And I would, if I'd been able, and let me tell you, I missed an important part of this story. So after I'd gone down to the VA in Riverside, that same year, I read in or the next year, 84, I read in the paper that they're dedicating the statues at the Veterans Memorial, Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and they're going to have reunions connected to that. And at the time, my son and daughter, well, both little tiny kids, we were strapped financially. And I read that, and so I tell my wife, hey, they're having these reunions at the dedication of the statues in Washington, D.C., and I'm going. She said, and it's happening this Saturday. This is like on a Wednesday. She says, well, how are you getting there? I said, well, I'm flying. She said, well, where are you getting the money? So I'm taking it out of the bank, out of our savings. She says, well, then just buy a one-way ticket. So that shows you what it was like. So I said, well, if that's what it takes, okay. But by the time I was ready to go, she was good with me getting a round trip ticket. So I went back there, and there was 100,000 vets, Vietnam vets, in town for that Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And I spent 3 days and 3 nights hanging out at the memorial. Most of the time sitting up above it, watching, and it was over the panels. There's 10 panels for 1967 when I was there. So I was sitting above the panels, and I'm watching all these people come. They're down below me, and they're pointing at stuff, and they're crying, and I'm thinking, God, this is 17 years after I served. And these people are pointing at names on these panels. Maybe they're pointing at names of guys that I knew. And I was struck by how much pain there still was out there. You know, I mean, all the tears. And I mean, it was just days of that kind of strong emotional kind of stuff. And I learned the term MIA, which typically among vets means missing in action. But there it meant missing in America. So while I'm there, I'm thinking, because I'm not real smart sometimes, God, I'm a counselor and I'm a veteran and there's all this pain. Maybe I should counsel veterans. So that's really how I hooked up back into the VA and doing the counseling. I left that part of the story out. That was the trick that put me in.
Would you be open to talking about some of those stories then?
Sure.
Not right now. Not right
You
now.
mean of the people I've, oh yeah, I got some good ones, but yes.
Because I'd be interested in following up this interview with a little bit more in depth. So Jim, I want to thank you. This has been really terrific. I'm just really interested in Vietnam and what happened, and I prefer to talk to people who've actually experienced it, you know, to get my information. Thank you so much. So
Well, and you know, like I said, there's 2.8 million of us. There's about 800,000 of us still alive, and each one of us got our own version. You know, they're all unique.
no, that's right. All right, Jim. Well, thank you, and we'll set up a time to do a follow-up too. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. See you.